The House of Assembly, the place where laws are introduced, bills passed, and policy enacted. But what happens when the politics gets in the way of the people's business? Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. While making it into office may be work within itself, what can be even more challenging is navigating through the politics of it all once elected. Within this current term, the governing party and House Speaker have had very public and even embarrassing disagreements. From countless accusations of the executive disrespecting the authority of the Speaker in Parliament, to the Speaker's resignation from the FNM, to the most recent abrupt adjournment of Parliament. It seems as though politics continues to get in the way of getting the job done within the legislative branch. Tonight on The Record, we sit with a former parliamentarian and an expert on parliamentary procedure. But of course, what's a show without the man at the center of it all, the Speaker himself, as we discuss legislating through the politics. Stay put. Our conversation begins on the other side of this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and tonight we are joined by former parliamentarians and experts on the lower house to try and get a clearer understanding of exactly what we've been witnessing. Last week, House Speaker Halston Moultrie adjourned Parliament after a member of his staff tested positive for COVID-19. When he reached out to both the Prime Minister and the Leader of Government Business in the House, asking that all members and staff be tested. But the House still met that morning without testing. Speaker Moultrie, using House Rule number 88, then abruptly adjourned until May 3rd. Well, my guest for this segment of the show knows a whole lot about how Parliament works. He's a former Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Local Government and a former Member of Parliament for Exuma. He vacated Parliament in 1997. Happy to have on the show the Honourable George Smith. Mr. Smith, welcome to On the Record.
It's good to be with you. Those people who are fortunate enough to be interviewed by you have always come away with the knowledge that they've been interviewed by one of the jewels of the fourth estate in the Bahamas.
Mr. Smith, of all my career, I've known you to be a charmer, and you haven't stopped now. But thank you very much for the compliment. Sir, I want us very quickly, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what we're here to discuss, let's talk about what is the role of the parliamentarian? What is the role of the elected official like yourself in the House of Assembly? When you are elected and when you were elected, what was your role in Parliament and how did you see yourself fulfilling that role?
The role of a member of Parliament, particularly, in our system we have two branches of Parliament. There's one elected, the House of Assembly, and there's one appointed to Senate. Both of those constitute our parliament. But since all the Bahamian people can't go to the House of Assembly, we divided the country into, as now exists, 38 constituencies where the people living in those geographical areas elects a person to represent them in their elected body. It is often referred to the lower house in the Westminster system, the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, the House of Representatives in Jamaica, the House of Assembly in the Bahamas, are the elected bodies by the people, so that the wishes of the people should be reflected in the contribution of those individuals who are fortunate enough to sit there in the people's arm of parliament. The other arm of parliament is in the United Kingdom known as the House of Lords. Here in Jamaica, it's known as the Senate. Those are the appointed body. That is where people who have had tenure in the House of Assembly, accomplishment in trade union and business ought to be appointed. As of late, we have used it in a most improper way, use it as a means to appoint to the Senate people who have failed to get elected to the House of Assembly, and that is not what it was intended for.
What's the danger of that, sir, if I may stop you? What's the danger of putting those people in Parliament, or those who have political aspirations? We see them going into the Senate as well, almost as a training ground for the House.
Well, it defeats the noble objective of the Senate. The Senate, as is the case in the United Kingdom and House of Lords, that is where you put your senior individuals, those who have been in elected politics and maybe have stepped aside, but their contribution is such that the country can still greatly benefit from them. So the Senate, in our case, is designed for that purpose. That is where you would put an outstanding educator, an outstanding businessman, so that a nation can benefit in terms of its parliamentary debate, in the richness of the ideas of those people, accomplished trade unionists, accomplished civil activists.
Fair enough, and that should be where that is. So as we move forward, now, once you would have campaigned and been elected and you get to the House of Assembly now, does the politics stop and you get into governance, or does it continue, and do the two clash? Because at the end of the day, you are connected to a party, your party is elected if you're in majority, but does the politics stop and governance begin, or are the two intermingled throughout?
Well, the politics initially is your means of getting elected to the parliament, to give life to those things that you said when you were campaigning and asking the people to repose their confidence in you. When you get to the House of Assembly, you have to now translate your intentions for the well-being of the Bahamian people into actual laws, policies, encouraging the government to do infrastructural projects in areas to improve the quality of life for the people living in the particular areas that you are called to be the spokesperson for. You then have to give meaning to what the people interpret to believe you intend to do for them when you get to the House of Assembly.
Are we seeing that nowadays? Is that happening in your opinion? Do we have that level of debate and academia, and are the elected officials doing what they were elected to do in your opinion?
Sadly, no. I believe that today, this is the worst House of Assembly we have had since we started the system in 1739. We have elected to people. We've elected to Parliament in the very recent elections people who have never, for instance, read the Constitution of the Bahamas that came into force on the 10th of July 1973. They are not familiar with the with many of the laws, that the penal code and a couple other laws that impact the lives of Bahamians on a daily basis. They don't know how to give advice to their constituents so that the constituents can access what they should expect from their government and from their country. They don't know how to say to the Ministry of Education, hey, look, we've got 10 schools in my constituencies, but I'm not happy with the quality of teachers, because they don't know how to recognize sufficiently whether those teachers in some of those schools meet the criteria which they ought to be credited.
So, sir, what's different from when you and others as young parliamentarians came to the House of Assembly under Sir Lyndon Pinling? What's different then, or what was different then? And why do, in your opinion, why do we have these deficiencies? What has happened?
Well, firstly, the motivation. In those days, most people who ran for the House of Assembly ran because they wanted to make life better for the Bahamian people, which meant they wanted to get to know the Bahamian people well, that they have a responsibility not just to deal with the lawbreakers, but to help to keep peace in the community. We truly made an effort to represent the hopes and the aspirations of the people who we were fortunate to vote for us. Today, people want to run for the House of Assembly so they could be in the House of Assembly, so they could take advantage of business deals and opportunities, develop a relationship with quote-unquote foreign investors, and forget about them investing their time and effort in the people for whom they are literally in work for in the House, in the interest of the business of the Bahamian people.
But Mr. Smith, in all fairness, some of the things that you say that the current members of Parliament or you accuse them of, I would have heard levied against those of your era as well. There were always accusations that people in the House of Assembly were interested in personal gain and personal wealth and connecting. And so these accusations that you levy are not new. I would have heard them time and time again. So what's different?
The difference, I think, is it was levied against a smaller group. Some individuals were. There's always bad apples in any barrel of apples. But most of the apples in those days were genuinely interested in the general good of the population. Today, those who are interested to that extent are few and far between. You could look at the effectiveness. The Bahamian people, listen to their contribution in the House. The Bahamian people can separate the few. Today, it is few of the many who are interested. In years back, it was most of the members, and there were always bad apples. That's true. You always will find that. In your noble profession, you got excellent journalists, and then you have some shit-ass journalists. Excuse my language.
Okay, so let me ask you this now. Is it different, you think, because Parliament is so accessible to the public now? When at the time you were in the House of Assembly, people got what was said through reporters. We came to the House and told your stories. Now you can turn on the TV, go online, and you can watch it. Do you think that's different? Do you think now the public gets to see more of Parliament and that has impacted the way we view Parliament and parliamentarians?
They get to see more, but they get to see less quality. In those days, the reporters were individuals who actually took great pride in reporting and translating the accuracy of what not only said and the language that was used, which was far better than the language now used by the parliamentarians. It was also translated. Compare the reporting today in the written press. It is not of the standard that, with few exceptions, with some exception, it is not of a standard when when the Sawyers and the Joneses and the Folks and the Candia Dames and Nikki Kelly, when they were actual reporters. The information that they shared with the public was studied, sound, and reasoned.
Well, I thank you for putting me among those giants. But let's talk a little bit about what has been happening recently in the House of Assembly. We would have seen just recently the Speaker of the House abruptly adjourned Parliament over the issue with a lack of testing after a staff member tested positive for COVID-19. Was that the right thing to do? Should he have done that course? Was that within the boundaries of what a Speaker should do or could do?
Well, firstly, we all, commiserate with the members of the House of Assembly staff. They're required to function under very difficult circumstances. In my day, we actually were mindful of the sacrifices the few staff members made to facilitate the functioning of the House of Assembly. Today, the staff, they're not considered as valuable, as necessary, as needed as I think they once were. So we all are saddened by that. What we're also saddened by, I think, is this. The Speaker is very mindful of the authority he has. And he does have authority. But he has authority that he ought to discharge in mindful of how he got to be Speaker. Now, Article 50 of the Constitution of the Bahamas clearly says the first order of business after the dissolution and an election is to elect a Speaker and a Deputy Speaker. And anyone so elected to those offices should read up on the authority, the power of the Speaker/Deputy Speaker. With those authority comes the individuals must be ever mindful of the process by which they got to be Speaker and Deputy Speaker. The Constitution also lays out the constitutional reasons why a Speaker/Deputy Speaker could be removed. It lays it out in Article 50, A, B, and C, and D of the Constitution.
Do you believe then, sir, that he abused? Did you think he overreached, and do you think he should be removed?
Well, everybody noticed. If I got into a position by this process, I belong to a political party. My party win a resounding mandate. They pick me to be their Speaker. They go first order of business, elect me Speaker. I know the authority that I have. I also must be mindful of how I got there and be mindful that the process that got me there, I should respect their wishes sufficiently to keep me there. And in addition to what the Constitution says, there are years of conventions that apply. The manual of procedure of the House of Assembly, the conduct of a Speaker, the conduct of members, most of those are not enshrined in the Constitution of the Bahamas, the supreme law of the country. They're enshrined in the conventions that are applicable.
So, sir,
that are not always written.
I understand. Just before we go, final question. Do you see this now affecting the work of government? It is quite clear that the Speaker, the Prime Minister, the leader of government business are at odds. How can government now function with passing legislation and doing the things that need to be done in Parliament if there is this almost standoff attitude with the Speaker? How is that going to work?
Well, again, constitutionally, the executive arm, that's the Cabinet, is answerable to Parliament for its conduct. Well, how could they be answerable to a Parliament that infrequently meet, and for a period while they were meeting, the Speaker was ridiculously abusive to a particular member of the opposition whom he, as Speaker, is bound to uphold. You know, there's an adage in our system: the government will have its way, but the opposition will have its say. Well, the Speaker's job is to so conduct the business of the House that the government legislative program is facilitated, while the opposition right to offer alternatives is also facilitated and protected. There were times in the past, Jerome, when I thought that the Speaker was far more sympathetic to the opposition than to the government.
Sir, I want to thank you. Thank you for the great insight and the great information. I promise I will bring you back again. We have more to talk about, as you and I have said so many times, but I appreciate your wisdom and your insight. Thank you very much. Continue to do well. We'll have you back on sometime soon in the future. Appreciate you, sir. Continue to be well.
All the best.
All right, thank you very much. So we have a lot more to talk about and to discuss. When we come back, we're going to be talking to someone who has been in the House of Assembly and in Parliament for many years, not having been elected there, but certainly has a great insight, as well as the man who everyone is talking about. The Speaker himself is going to join us later on. Stay with us. More on the record right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. You're watching On the Record. Tonight we take a deeper look into legislating through the politics. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Now, during this Speaker's tenure, we have seen him go to war, per se, with just about every entity that makes up the House of Assembly, from government to opposition, and the most startling of them all, former senior clerk of the House. My next guest has held the position of Chief Parliamentary Clerk for some 24 years. He is the third appointed clerk to the House in an independent Bahamas and is also the longest serving clerk in an independent Bahamas. My guest, no stranger to us in the media, to members of the House of Assembly, even to the public, you having watched him over the years discharge his duties, Mr. Maurice Tynes. Sir, welcome to On the Record. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on our show.
Good to be here, Jerome.
Sir, in your 24 years in your position, and even knowing the history of the House of Assembly, the inner workings of Parliament and the Senate, have you ever seen a situation like this where we witness and have come to witness on a consistent basis the clash between the Speaker and the government, and almost a standoff in some instances?
No, I've never seen it to this extent. Surely the two branches of government, the legislative branch and the executive branch, ought not to be at war. And I was astounded when I heard that word used in that context. That ought not to happen in a Westminster democracy.
What is the threat now to the continuation of democracy, to the government being able to discharge its agenda and things of that nature? Does this threaten now the ability of democracy and even the country to function?
Yes, I think it does threaten the democracy as we have known it. because we have where you have this war between the two branches trying to get control. It does not work for the people of the Bahamas. The principle of separation of powers means that you disperse the power over the three branches of government. Each branch has its own role to play, and neither is more powerful than the other administratively.
Sir, last week the Speaker of the House abruptly ended Parliament, which is the reason we are sitting here discussing all of this, quoting House Rule number 88, Section 9. Was this an abuse of his power, and did he use the correct rule in a situation such as this?
No, I think it was an abuse of his power, because the section that he was quoting from is how to keep order in the House and in the committees, and it actually outlines a process for keeping order in the House, and the rule that he used was actually a rule that was applicable to the Speaker using the power to name a member of Parliament, and the way I see it is that is only supposed to be used while in naming a member, the House then gets in disorder, and he can't control it. So he adjourns the House in that circumstance. But that is not what happened last week nor last night or yesterday in my opinion. So,
sir, help us to understand, if there is an issue, if the Speaker has an issue, whether it be with COVID-19 in this instance, or in the past where he would have even made representation and complained about the conditions of his office, or other things he would have brought to Parliament, if there is that conflict, or the Speaker has a concern, and he has it with the governing party of which he is a part, or had been at that point, what should happen? What should be the procedure to him addressing those concerns?
Well, the concerns that the Speaker has brought up on a number of occasions publicly was an issue that we have been dealing with in the Parliament for years and years, and we have tried to encourage speakers to get the government to see that it is not in the interest of democracy for it to subjugate the Parliament under a ministry or agency of the government. So we've been doing that for years, but we've been doing it privately, in letters to the Prime Minister, in cabinet papers to the cabinet, and when we have seminars and discussing it in seminars, and the speaker, I heard him tell some media that way that we've been doing it in the past obviously didn't work, and so he decided to be upfront and public with it, and obviously that has not worked, and it not working has turned the Parliament into a laughing stock in the country, in my opinion.
How do we resolve this? How do we get past this? I mean, what you're saying and bringing to our attention, this is not a new issue. This has been going on. So successive governments have not done what has been asked. He has taken a different road. It's created this. Now, what's the answer in your opinion? How do we move past all of this, particularly when you've got the people's business on the table to be done?
Well, yeah. Well, you see, at the bottom of this, I think, is a political issue of his nomination, and I think that's why it has been brought up the way it has been at this point. But I think the speaker has legitimate the concerns that the speaker have are legitimate, and I think the government ought to have by this time addressed it in some way. And what we have recommended is that like other countries have done, is that you remove the parliamentary staff out of the Public Service Commission and place them under you establish a parliamentary commission made up of, say, the Speaker, House leaders, the President of the Senate, the Leader of the Senate, and along with opposition members. They form a commission which functions for the parliamentary staff as the Public Service Commission. So that parliamentary commission would be responsible for recruiting staff, for training staff, and for punishing staff. I think that is the basic thing that has to happen. And it's nothing difficult in my mind, it is nothing difficult to achieve.
Seems like we just lack the will to do certain things. Sir, one of the things that he is calling for is to make Parliament virtual in some ways, or go to a hybrid platform, considering we are now in our third wave of COVID-19, and it's something that's happened in our other jurisdictions, and we see it happening in other countries. What are the impediments to something like that? And do you agree that at this point we should be in a hybrid or virtual situation in Parliament?
Yeah, I think under the circumstances of the pandemic, we probably ought to be under a virtual set. And the impediments to that, number one would be the parliamentary building itself. It doesn't, it's a building that has been there for over 200 years. It doesn't have even though it has Wi-Fi and internet connections and stuff like that, it doesn't have the total infrastructure to go virtual the way you would want it. And so to me, it's a matter of resources. What kind of resources are the government willing to put into the Parliament? They place all sorts of resources into the other two branches of government. They spend lots of money on buildings and infrastructure for the executive branch, and for the courts and the judiciary. But they somehow do not feel as if the Parliament is worthy of those same resources. And I think that is the problem that we are facing right now.
Okay, understood. 3 years ago, you wrote in an article in local media expressing that you were genuinely alarmed and disturbed at the ordeal that occurred between the Member of Parliament for Angliston, Clerk Hannah Martin, and the Speaker of the House. You stated that the Speaker should never put the chair in a position where it is in open and obvious controversy with a member. Just yesterday, we saw the Speaker again naming the Leader of the Opposition again over an instance with the member for Angliston. Are we seeing a situation, in your opinion, or do you feel that the Speaker is allowing his emotions now to get in the way of operating Parliament?
Yeah, that is certainly what is happening. I think it's a misunderstanding of how to apply the rules to keep the Parliament in order. If the House gets in a disorder between the Speaker and a member, the Speaker can ask that member or order that member to withdraw from the service of the House for the rest of the day, or for 2 sittings. He has the power to do that. just to ask them to withdraw. Now, if they fail to withdraw, that is the point where you name a person. And by naming a member, there is a process that you must go through. I saw where yesterday, where the deputy speaker named the member and didn't go through the process. If you name a member, the speaker then has to get the leader of the House to move a motion to ask the member to withdraw from the service of the House for a period of time. And when that motion is put, there is a vote. There's no amendments or anything. It's just a clear vote.
So the deputy speaker yesterday, you're saying, did not follow the procedure?
No, he did not. Neither did the speaker at an early time that you mentioned either. When you name a member, there is a process you have to go through. And neither of them went through that process.
So how much?
You see,
Go ahead.
They're mixing up asking a member to withdraw from the House, which they have the power to do if that member is acting disorderly. But if the member refuses to withdraw, and then you name, that's at the point where you name a person and go through that process of naming him and moving a motion to have him withdrawn, to withdraw from the service of the House.
Interesting. Sir, how much of what we are witnessing is political? And I mean, you're on opposing political sides. You go through a campaign to get to the House of Assembly. Whomever gets a majority wins. Who gets a minority is in opposition. And we see the clashes constantly. I mean, it's not new to us. It happens in every parliamentary system. But how much of what we are witnessing do you think is purely political? And I'm even talking about, as you would have mentioned, the standoff seemingly between the Speaker and the Prime Minister and leader of government business, and even these clashes with the opposition. Do you feel, sir, that these are purely political?
I think there is also a good amount of misunderstanding the parliamentary process, all of the conventions of the Parliament, and the rules, and not only the rules. You cannot apply the rules what you see word by word. You have to apply the rules according to the history of your Parliament and the convention of your Parliament over the years, and I think that is the big part of the. It is an adversarial. The two sides are adversarial, and you will have the spirited. You can have nothing wrong with spirited disagreements, but I think when you are at war, that is totally different.
And
how much of it is political? I'm sure there's an element of politics in it, but I don't know if that is the main problem.
So thank you very much for providing some insight. I thank you. I want to thank you personally. You, Mr. Tynes, guided me for many years in the House of Assembly as a young reporter. I cut my teeth in the House, and many times I'd have to go to him afterwards and ask for explanations and help. And I appreciate you. You guided myself and others for many, many years. We appreciate your service to country. Continue to do well. Be well. You look well, as I told you before we came on. Thank you so very much. As we need you again, sir, we'll call on you to give us some insight into all of this. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
You're quite welcome. It was my pleasure to do so.
All right, so when we come back, we're going to sit down with a man who's willing to go to war if that's what he's required to do. You don't want to miss our last segment, the man who rules with the iron fist. He's the Speaker of the House. There's still more to come right here on the record right after this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. And welcome back to our discussion tonight. On the Record, legislating through the politics, how to get the work of the legislative branch done, politics aside. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and as always, thank you for staying with us. Well, my next guest is not shy and has not shied away from bucking conventional behavior in Parliament and the discharge of his duties. From his resignation from his party to his abrupt adjournment of Parliament, Speaker Halston Moultrie showed that the job will get done despite the game of politics. We are happy to welcome back to On the Record the Speaker of the Honourable House of Assembly, the Honourable Halston Moultrie. Mr. Speaker, you've been very busy over the past few days. I'm going to jump right in. Do you still feel that your actions were justified with the adjournment we saw last week, and even as recently as yesterday, the back and forth between yourself and the Prime Minister? Do you still feel that all of these actions on your part were justified?
Yes. I believe that the Parliament should always be seen as an independent arm of the government. The legislative branch of the government is actually the first arm of government. And the Speaker's role is to make sure that the representative function of the Parliament is maintained, the legislative function is well maintained, and also its oversight function is well maintained. And the reason why there was an abrupt adjournment of the Parliament last week was because the Speaker had, after communicating with the Prime Minister, had made a decision to ask staff to go into quarantine because the Clerk of Parliament had contracted the COVID-19 coronavirus. In the Speaker's estimation, the Speaker's decision was undermined when the Cabinet called in one of the staffers from quarantine and indicated to that staffer that she was basically protected because she had previously contracted the virus, and that the antibodies built up in her body would protect her. But my issue really was that the Parliament was not sanitized. And we felt until all members were tested, no business should be conducted in those facilities. And so we were all on quarantine when I discovered that the government, the Cabinet, had contacted staffers and had indicated to them that they wanted them to come in despite being in quarantine, despite the Parliament not being sanitized. So I came out of quarantine myself to make certain that that didn't happen.
So, if you could, sir, who would have put the individuals in quarantine, yourself or the Ministry of Health?
We went into self-imposed quarantine because the decision was taken by the Speaker that the staffers should be tested for the COVID-19 virus.
So help me to understand, though, should not that have come from the Ministry of Health? In an instance like this, does not the Ministry of Health give yourself and other entities advice, or was the advice sought in dealing with a situation like this?
No, but those protocols had already been established a long time ago. As a matter of fact, that very staffer in September of last year had contracted the virus. And those protocols were put in place from September of last year. So everyone knew, including the Cabinet, the Prime Minister, and all members of Parliament and senators, knew that if there was a circumstance where a member had contracted the virus or where a staffer had contracted the virus, the necessary protocols will require testing, sanitization, and the proper physical distancing.
So you assert, sir, that the protocols were in place. Now, some, even my previous guests, have accused you of an abuse of power in this regard. How do you respond to that?
Well, sometimes when you're used to the speaker functioning in a traditional way where he's attached to a political party, you won't expect a speaker to challenge the executive branch of the government. But the entire Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is moving away from that concept because it is becoming very apparent that the executive branch of government is usurping the authority and the constitutional authority given to the legislative branch. And so all of the parliaments are basically moving towards an open parliament with an independent speaker.
Now,
so those persons who may feel that it is an abuse of power should cite the rules or the procedure that the speaker is abusing.
So
no one can argue.
One of the criticisms, sir, is that the speaker is elected from the majority, meaning your party wins, you would have campaigned, you would have been a part of that. And so there is almost the expectation, the understanding, the historical reference that the speaker will not depart from that party in the way that you have departed in many instances in your public rebuke, and even going so far as to resign from the party.
Yes, that is the norm in the more mature democracies, where even though the speaker may have been attached to a political party, upon being elected speaker, the speaker would resign from his party and function independently. Our democracy has just not matured to that level yet. But all of the democracies that accept and adopt the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy are moving away from that old archaic form of democracy where the speaker basically is an agent of the majority party.
Now, some of the accusations levied against you, as well, is that these decisions that you have taken come from a place of emotion, and they're emotional decision reactions, etc. Again, how do you respond?
Well, if someone can suggest to me that it is emotional for a person with a scientific background to make a decision to close down a parliament that has not been sanitized after someone has been affected with the coronavirus, that is an emotional decision. I would want to stay far from a person who can conclude that such a decision is emotional. That decision was based on the fact that it was not a healthy place for staffers or members of parliament to be at that time. Until the house was sanitized, until the tests were done, we should not have conducted business in that place. And if we examine the remainder of the society, we will discover that that is not abnormal, that is not unusual. That is happening in almost every other business agency where persons contract the virus. There's a shutdown. It's been happening in schools, it's been happening in private businesses. So what's so unusual for it to happen in the Parliament of the Bahamas where the laws and orders are being made?
So in your, prior to adjourning the House, you would have again asked for and again rebuked government for not moving to a virtual platform or a hybrid platform. What, sir, has been the prohibiting factor? Why has the House, even the Senate, not, and let's say even the cabinet meetings, why have they not moved fully to virtual platforms, in your estimation?
In my estimation, it is simply a decision by the executive branch to prove to the legislative branch and the speaker that they are in charge.
So this is a power move, sir? This all has to do with power?
That's exactly what it is. It makes no sense. When you think about it, it makes no sense.
What now is the resolution? In your own words, you're at war. Many have criticized that. How could the speaker be at war with the government? I mean, how are we supposed to get business done if you've declared war?
I haven't declared war. What I said was that if you want a war, you can get one.
Is there one?
And if you don't want a war, then you should not practice and conduct activities that suggest to the speaker that you are at war with the legislative branch.
Do you feel, though, that they are at war with you, sir? Do you feel that they are, you said if you want war, you'll get it. Do you feel that you've gotten it? Have they brought the fight?
Well, let's put it this way. What I think is happening is a resistance to whatever proposal the speaker put forward, no matter whether it is reasonable or not. For example, the speaker went and tried to find locations in the country for the parliament, to host the parliament. Bahama volunteered its facilities free of charge to the Bahamian taxpayers, had established seating areas that were almost 12 feet physical distancing. They offered their equipment. They offered a secretariat room, all free. But again, that was rejected. The resolution was put forward by the speaker. That was rejected. Everywhere else on the face of the state is moving towards a hybrid form of functioning and a virtual sittings for
Sir,
Parliament.
we've got to wrap up after this. How bad is the situation going to get? The people's business has to be conducted in the House. You, the Prime Minister, the leader of government business, seem to be at odds. What's going to be the outcome? How can we expect the country to move forward with legislation, etc., policy, if this situation seems to be worsening?
Well, I don't know if the situation is worsening. It's just a matter of respect. I believe that we can move ahead and the business of the House can proceed if we are prepared to function with respect. The rules are very clear, you know. If in the opinion of the Speaker, there is a disorder, disruption, disturbance, disrespect, in other words, the rules are basically saying if you diss the Parliament or you diss the legislative branch, it is the responsibility of the Speaker to bring the proper decorum back into the legislative branch so that the legislative branch can fulfill its constitutional mandate. Let me ask you something, Jerome. If you call a person is on quarantine, you call that person in out of the quarantine and you indicate that they are protected because they have antibodies because having prior contracted the virus. And then you set up a testing on the 30th of April, and that person went into the testing and tested negative. But you have your doctor advise that very same person that you brought in out of quarantine that they should not attend work and they should extend their quarantine to Friday of this week so that you would then bring personnel in from the Cabinet Office to run the Parliament. You think the Speaker should just sit by and allow that to happen?
I think you've answered that question quite clearly in your actions. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. Always very candid. Thank you for bringing some insight into the situation. We continue to wish you all the best. Continue to be well. Keep safe. There's still lots of COVID out there. So thank you so much, sir. We appreciate you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's edition of On the Record, Legislating Through the Politics. Special thanks to all of my guests, former parliamentarians, former Chief Clerk, the current Speaker. Thank you so much. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same place, right here on The Record.